Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to the meeting of the Police and Crime Panel. We'll just do a round of introductions, please, before we get started. If I can start to my right. That's right.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Adesa Omorike, Interim Director of Legal and Governance.
Hi, Chair. Simon, Councillor Barkham, Paston Walton.
Councillor John Gowan.
Councillor Graham Wilson from Cambridgeshire.
Phil Trussell, Chief Financial Officer.
John Peach, Deputy Police and Crime Commissioner.
Jim Haylett, Chief Executive for the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Good afternoon, Chair. Good afternoon, panel. Darrell Preston, Police and Crime Commissioner for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough.
Good afternoon, Nikki Edwards, Director of Commissioning for the Cambridge Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner.
Good afternoon, Councillor Baijyuthi Talavarki from Cambridge City Council.
Councillor Stephen Ferguson from Cambridgeshire.
Hello everybody, Councillor Susan Ward from Fenland District Council.
Edward Lee, Independent Co-opted Member.
Good afternoon everyone, Dennis Jones, Peterborough Councillor and Vice Chair of this committee.
Jonathan Deacon, Secretariat for the meeting.
I'm Claire George, I'm Independent Member of the panel and Chair. So we'll move through onto the agenda. First, item number 1, apologies for absence. Jonathan, do we have any apologies for absence, please?
Yes, Chair. Apologies for absence are Councillor Marge Patel, Anna Bradnam, Helen Leeming, Brian Tyler and Alan Sharp.
Thank you very much. Item number 2, declarations of interest. Does any member wish to declare any disclosable pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? If so, please could they raise their hand now? No? No declarations, thank you. Right, item number 3, minutes of the meeting held on the 20th of September 2023. Panel members happy to agree the minutes of the last meeting held on the 20th of September?
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. We'll sign them off in a minute. I would like to just take this opportunity at this point in the agenda to thank very much our colleague Edward Lee. Edward Lee has done sterling work on the panel for a considerable period of time and as the last 5 years as chair. So we're very sorry to be losing you, Edward. Oh, look, see? Now look. There you are, you see. A perfect tribute. Thank you very much for your help and support. Thank you. Okay, item number 4, review of actions and recommendations from the previous meeting. Commissioner, is there anything that you would wish to report back on, sir, from the last meeting?
Thank you, Chair. No, not formal actions as per usual. There were some questions asked that I said I would take away. The first was on the nasal naloxone spray. Panel members will be aware this is a drug which can be administered for those who are suffering from overdose. The police are trialling this. What I can say at the moment is that currently officers in Huntingdonshire, Peterborough, Fenland and Cambridge City have been piloting them, and there are plans to roll out in East and South Cambs. What I can say, since their introduction of April 2021, they have been successfully used on 11 occasions by police officers, so that's potentially saving 11 lives. County Lines video, Councillor Bradnam asked about the future plans around this. What I can say, I'm very pleased that Cambridge Community Safety Partnership are leading on this on behalf of the county, and they are currently doing a one for 5 to 6 year 5 and 6 pupils, so that's primary school pupils, and I can give reassurance that all the appropriate safeguards are in place and parents are being consulted in the putting together of that programme. There was a question around constabulary engagement with councillors on local issues. That has an issue we have passed to the Chief Constable to address. Feedback from pop-up knife crime awareness events in Peterborough. I have a fairly comprehensive update, but I think the feedback is it was felt to be very successful with over 1,200 young people attending. And the last one was around police cadets waiting lists. And unfortunately, they are proving to be very popular and they're doing a fantastic job, our police cadets. The issue is actually around volunteers, the trainers and coaches. So I would reach out to the panel if you know of anybody in your community who would like to, it doesn't need to be a police officer, who would like to assist and help out with the running of the voluntary police cadets, then please do let the constabulary or myself know. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Just after the last meeting, I was contacted by PC Dave Stevens in Peterborough, and that was something I probably raised, and we've been in touch ever since with actual results. So thank you for actioning, and the relationship is working well in terms of finding out what's going on and the passing of intelligence. So it is appreciated. Thank you.
So we move to item number 5, public questions. Jonathan, do we have any public questions?
Yes, Chair. Yes, I think Mr. Fulton's got a question for us.
Thank you, Mr. Fulton.
Yes, I do. Thank you. And this question has been edited in compliance with the panel's procedures.
Thank you.
According to guidance published by the Ministry of Justice, all defendants facing committal to prison for contempt of court are entitled to legal aid. My understanding is that Waitman's, the firm of the solicitors representing Chief Constable Nick Dean, does not accept legal aid.
The public question is the one that had been edited, not the one that you submitted, and I think you're fully aware of that.
Madam Chairman.
You may ask the question that has been agreed.
Madam Chairman, with all due respect, I cannot imagine why this panel would want to censor me asking this important question about the expenditure of public funds, apparently the improper expenditure of public funds, contrary to all the relevant legal provisions and guidance.
Mr. Fulton, I will give you one further warning. You may ask the question that has been agreed, or we will be asking you to leave.
Does the Police and Crime Commissioner agree that he has adequately supervised the work of Chief Constable Nick Dean since he came to office in 2021? I look forward to asking my supplementary question.
Do you wish to make a response to that?
Thank you, Chair. On this occasion, my Chief Executive and Monitoring Officer will take that question.
Thank you, Chair. Before I answer on behalf of the Commissioner, can I ask Mr. Fulton what his connection is with Fuse Lane Consortium Limited?
You can. Mr. Fulton, would you like to respond to that?
I am here to ask a question today to the panel in my individual capacity. I was not aware that I was to be questioned by Mr. Haylett.
Thank you very much, Mr. Fulton. So, panel members, I'd like to bring to your attention Fuse Lane Consortium Limited. A normal Google search of Companies House shows the only director is a Mr. Daniel Fulton and shows no other employees. On the Fuse Lane Consortium X or Twitter account, a version of the question presented today was posted saying essentially we're asking this question. So it's fair to say that Mr. Fulton here today is the same Mr. Fulton connected with Fuse Lane Consortium. Panel members, since earlier in the year, Fuse Lane Consortium has conducted what I can only describe as a misinformation campaign regarding the Chief Constable, the Police and Crime Commissioner, and the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner. This has gone on for many months. I have numerous examples that I do not intend to repeat. However, there is one particular post that I will repeat, as it conveys to panel members the damaging nature of the posts from this company. The PCC published a post intended to raise awareness of Stalking and Harassment Week, together with a link for victims to seek support. Fuse Lane Consortium posted the following in reply. Victims should be aware that @PCC CAMS stores the sensitive personal data of stalking victims on a computer system that is accessible to thousands of employees across 3 police areas. @PCC CAMS has admitted at least one serious data breach already this year. Firstly, the statement that the OPCC store victims of crimes details is not true. It is the constabulary that record those details directly from the victim. We do not have access to the sensitive data in that system. Secondly, the OPCC has not admitted a serious data breach. The OPCC has had no serious data breach. Now, the reason I highlight this one post is obviously the damaging impact that this has. I'm struggling to see any other purpose for this post than essentially trying to deter victims of crime from seeking the support that they need. Misleading victims of crime and deterring them from seeking support is positively harmful and quite disgraceful for an organisation that badges itself as seeking justice for Cambridgeshire communities. You may ask why we haven't publicly rebutted this or the multitude of other misleading posts. Quite simply, as soon as a rebuttal takes place, the number who do see it goes up, and this facilitates the spread of misinformation. Not only do such misinformation campaigns undermine public confidence when unfounded statements and allegations are directed at public officials, there is a personal impact upon them. Clearly, I welcome transparency and scrutiny of public officials. That is, after all, my job. But it must be appropriate. We cannot control what allegations and information individuals choose to post on social media, but we can control our own processes and how we deal with them when such matters are presented to us. I would urge panel officers to bear that in mind when determining appropriate handling of requests. On the run-up to panel meetings, the Fuse Lane Consortium X activity tends to increase related to questions being posed to the panel, which I think are spurious at best. We all have policies and processes in place for how to deal with inappropriate or vexatious or repetitious complaints, questions and letters. Officers' roles are more than solely to administer a process. Judgment should be exercised robustly if the integrity of the process is to be maintained, public resource not wasted, and public confidence not needlessly undermined. I would urge panel officers in future to take a robust approach to ensure that even more public money and resource is not wasted on such gaming of processes that are designed for genuine public interest and scrutiny. I would also ask members to consider whether they comment or like or repost any such posts, which in doing so raises the profile of them. In concluding, panel members, I believe the original and amended question posed fits the criteria for exclusion in accordance with the panel rules of procedure as illegal, improper, irregular, frivolous or offences, given the context of the Twitter campaign. If the panel, however, do feel that in the circumstances the question is appropriate and requires an answer, I would respectfully suggest that it is for the panel to answer and not the Commissioner. The panel has met, including this meeting, 14 times since the Commissioner was elected. It is the panel's responsibility to satisfy themselves whether the Commissioner is fulfilling his statutory functions in holding the Chief Constable to account, and I would again respectfully suggest that the panel has done so in those 14 meetings. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Fulton, you may have one supplementary question, but it must be related either to your original question or the information you've just provided with.
Thank you. Mr. Haylett's response was not related to my original question, so I will respond to him as best I am able. The first issue is that Mr. Preston, as Police and Crime Commissioner, has consistently failed to perform his statutory duties in regards to the conduct of the Chief Constable. In particular, on the 9th of October of this year, Mr. Preston was provided with a copy of court papers from the County Court at Peterborough. These papers indicated that there was a conduct
Mr.
matter.
Fulton,
can you stop now, please?
Can you just, it's a follow-up question to the original question or what has been raised. So can you please direct the follow-up question that you want to raise?
Yes, I can. Thank you. An allegation of contempt of court is a conduct matter under Section 12 of the Police Reform Act 2002 and Paragraph 10, Schedule 3 of the Act. Can the Police and Crime Commissioner please explain why he and his office have failed to record a conduct matter reported to him on the 9th of October, and no action has been taken in that regard?
Do you have a response to that?
I don't think the question falls in the criteria for one which should be put as part of the public questions.
I think everyone can see that Mr. Preston has declined to answer the question, which is a response enough. Thank you very much to the chair.
Well, I think it's more to do with the fact that
speak.
it doesn't fall within the criteria. And we've responded to the first question, and we'll note for the minutes the second question doesn't fall within the criteria.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, moving on then to item number 6. This agenda item is around the Police and Crime Commissioner's approach to commissioning and grants. Commissioner, would you like to present your report?
Thank you, Chair. So this paper sets out my approach commissioning and grants, which is guided by the commissioning cycle and a series of key principles. And this approach ensures a robust framework is in place with the award of all funding from £500 to £1 million, but still enables us to be agile and get funding to charities when they most need it. If I may, Chair, and unusually for me, I will hand over very shortly to my commissioning officer, lead for commissioning, Nikki, who is with us today, not least of which I'm immensely grateful for the work that she and the whole team do in relation to commissioning and grants. We have been rubber stamped as, I don't think outstanding in this, but we've been rubber stamped for some really good work around commissioning grants, and I also know that my team support other agencies and organisations in their commissioning cycles. Indeed, my office brings in far more money in relation to grants than what the office costs. But I do want to give just one example. As part of my role, obviously, there's that strategic and statutory duties that I have in holding the constabulary to account. But I do like to spend time going out and visiting some of the great organisations and charities. And I'm going to mention one of the many, many hundreds that we are supporting that we have commissioned over the past 2.5 years. I recently visited the Cambridge Deaf Association as part of a district day, we call them, going out and just meeting members of the public, residents, councillors, etc. And I didn't really know what to expect, what I would find there. But the reason I went there is that we commissioned, through the great work of the team, an independent domestic violence advisor who knows British Sign Language, who is deaf themselves. And I was also able to speak to a person there, a deaf person, who had been a victim of fairly serious domestic abuse. So to hear this firsthand. What I learned that day is that if you are deaf, hearing impaired, you are more than twice as likely to be a victim of domestic abuse. And maybe that should be obvious to us. It's a vulnerability like many other vulnerabilities. But that's the good part about this job. The good part is seeing great people in our charities and communities supporting victims of domestic abuse in real life on the ground. So on that point, Nikki, if I can just hand over to you, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Okay, so I don't intend to go through the paper in great detail because it's there for everybody to see, but with everybody's permission, I'll just pick out a few things I think the most important that reflects some of the work we've done in the past 2.5 years. I think for people who've been on the panel for a little while, you'll see the breadth of the areas we're managing funding for has really grown since we started as Police and Crime Commissioners offices, and it isn't just support services for victims of crime, but we're managing domestic abuse perpetrator projects, lots of work linked to serious violence, and most recently Safer Streets funds. And I think you will see from the paper we were recently successful for another £1 million for Cambridgeshire, which was absolutely amazing that a small shire counties brought another £1 million in, and this time we've got projects in Cambridge, in Huntingdonshire, in Fenland and in Peterborough. And this is on top of the existing work we do linked to reducing crime and disorder. As you'll see at 4.7, we're currently managing 83 different providers across 114 different funding awards. When we counted this up, we were really surprised as well. It doesn't even include the small grants that the Commissioner awards in local areas for youth provision or for sort of small community projects. So that's on top of that. It does place a significant demand on our office, as you will see again. there's one example in there of some of the things we have to actually do to enable us to secure government funding. For example, the recent 6-monthly return for our victim services funding involved compiling 67 documents, editing 14 case studies, and completing an 8-tab Excel spreadsheet. And one of the tabs is 970 lines long. We were just like, okay. But we did it thanks to one of our amazing team members who sat behind us. And we always make sure our returns are in on time. So, again, as the Commissioner says, we've been hugely successful in being able to bring additional funding into Cambridgeshire, which we're really, really proud of. And it's that commissioning cycle and really understanding what is needed within our remit in the county that enables us to be really responsive and develop the bids that we do. But one of the things I did want to highlight for you, which is in the paper, which is about the fact that we have social value where we can woven into our work. And there's a great example in there that the Road Victims Trust have been able, in the first 2 quarters, the Road Victims Trust support the bereaved families where somebody's been killed in a road accident. And they invest volunteer counsellors, so we provide funding for the service, they put volunteer counsellors in. And by the end of quarter 2, if they're putting the same number of hours in as they have so far, by the end of the year they'll have put 94% match funding in. So what we fund, they're almost funding again with volunteer counselling hours, which is just an amazing model that we can empower that charity to do that. So at 7.1, you'll see the extra funding that the Commissioner referred to, which we've managed to bring in within the term of the election. 2.5 million in 23-24 alone, 6.6 million across the Commissioner's term of office. We've been able to significantly enhance the provision in our county, which doesn't just benefit service users in Cambridgeshire, the people who live in our county, but also the other agencies, such as the local authority, policing, health and probation.
And if I may just finish, Chair, you would have heard me talk before around supporting our community safety partnerships in Peterborough, the Peterborough Safety Partnership. And what I can say as of today, it's pleasing to see that all of our local authority areas are now on board. They will all have an additional post, or a problem-solving post, and there has been some fantastic examples of how that's actually working on the ground, bringing partners together, and supported by my community fund. So it took 2.5 years, but now Huntingdonshire and Peterborough are fully on board and some great work going on. Thank you.
That's really good news. Thank you, Commissioner. Panel members have questions. Certainly, let's go. Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I was very impressed by what you said initially about the internal audit assurance of substantial assurance. So that clearly indicates that what you're doing is right. Could you just provide a bit more information about the criteria that you use to assess quotations and in particular working with partners?
Okay, so we have a mixed model of commissioning in Cambridgeshire. So we award funding through grants where we're allowed to do so, but also through contracts. But when I presume that what you're asking is about the criteria for contracts. Yeah, we follow the procurement legislation, so we do that supported by our Seven Force Commercial Services. So when our tender goes out open and transparently, we'll draft tender questions and evaluate them all based on those questions, and we tend to go for a 70-30 split, so 70% quality, 30% cost for victim services, because that's much more important at times than the cost of the provision. It's about the quality as well. So we stick to all procurement guidelines and legislation that have been set through our financial standing orders. With regards to the second part of your commission about how we work with partners, we do co-commission quite a lot of services, which is great because it avoids duplication. It ensures that actually we can pool the resources of the public sector to better suit what's needed. We work quite a lot with our local authority domestic abuse and sexual violence partnership. We work with probation, we work with health, so across all the agencies.
And if I could just follow that up, how do you choose the partners that you're going to work with? Is that a similar 70-30 split or something different?
Do you mean the partners that we commission with? there tends to be a number of agencies that are at the table when we're talking about victim support services. Either they've got a statutory duty to deliver services like we have, or they've got a statutory duty to safeguard, so it tends to be linked to the duty that they have. So, for example, we would work with the local authority because they have that duty to safeguard and to provide safe accommodation. We would work with probation on things like domestic abuse perpetrator programmes, and health when we're looking at mental health.
Thank you, Chair. It's a three-part, if you just indulge, I won't take too long. Ms. Preston, hi, thanks for coming. Just briefly, you mentioned the police cadets. That was my question that I put to it last time. It's great that you've got some funding, new funding, that you're doing well on those. Is none of that available for police cadet people who deliver the service? Why are the others funded, but the police cadets isn't funded? So, for example, sea cadets or armed cadets, they're all funded, but the police cadets isn't. Just on the back of that one, if you do want to do a volunteer recruitment campaign, is there anything we can share, for example? Because if we don't have funding, we might have to find volunteers. But why is it not funded, was my initial question on that first one. Secondly, on the back of Councillor Wilson's point, if there's any reports in the future, can you put down what the criteria might be on whether the question was regarding, so we don't have to ask the question, what is the criteria? If you just put it down, it will give us some information about what to look for, or to ask a question relevant to that. Does that make sense? And finally, on page 12, it's section 5.2, it says we would clearly set out the outcomes to be achieved. I just want to know what those outcomes are, if you decide what they are yet. It just doesn't list them yet. It just says we will clearly set them out. That's all. Thank you. I hope that all makes sense.
Most of it, certainly. If it doesn't, I will come back to you. I will ask Nikki to give some of the details. I mean, clearly the cadets do receive funding, like anything. In fact, the sea cadets and air cadets and other cadets have also come to my office, and on occasions have been successful for our youth fund. But Nikki, would you like to give some detail, please?
Thank you. If we take the police cadet one first, then I might just need to ask some clarity on the second one, if that's all right. So the volunteer police cadets were set up with a purely volunteer-based model. That was how they were set up. And when they were set up, we didn't have any problems getting volunteers to actually come in. And in fact, we used police officers as well to do that. Since then, there is a national volunteering crisis. We know about that. We've had lots of conversations with our CVSs in this county. There is a reduction in the number of people wanting to volunteer following the cost of living. So that may require a review of how we do this. But there is funding, the Commissioner makes funding available for cadet activities, and previously what we've done is invested into posts in the Constabulary to help them have more capacity. So really interestingly, in Safer Streets 4 and back in 5 again, what we've got is a post in there that has a little bit of their time dedicated to working with the cadet units in those areas to really enable them to do more volunteering work. So we're trying to build capacity where we can using government funding sources. Does that answer? And can you just repeat the second one, just so I know exactly what you're asking?
It was just the back of Councillor Wilson's question, where I was asking about the criteria for such. Can you put in future reports what the criteria is? Then we'll have to ask that
changes
question.
For everything. That's
yes,
the
absolutely.
Issue. Yeah, so the criteria for funding depends on what the actual thing we're trying to fill, what service we're trying to commission. So, for example, we did an open round one year where we were looking for victim services providers to put small bids into us to improve access to their services. So the criteria for that would be very different for something else. The criteria for commissioned services might be that they're based in Cambridgeshire, so our commissioning strategy sets out what our key principles are, and we tend to try and fund services that are locally based, that may be already funded as well, to try and build capacity in our local communities rather than funding national charities, for example. So I couldn't give you a stock answer on what the criteria, because it's different for absolutely everything, because the breadth of our work is so broad. We could maybe pick some samples out and share them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
And I think the last one was on outcomes. So, you know, there will be, on most of them, evaluation. There is also regular and frequent monitoring meetings. So I think we had one recently with Women's Aid, which went really well, and another one recently with the YMCA, who just talking on outcomes. They're doing a perpetrator-based program for young domestic abusers on parents. So this is children on parents, and the evaluation at the moment is staggering as to the results that we're getting. It comes back to my view: early intervention is the best prevention. What we've seen is practically no reoccurrence of the domestic abuse, and professional judgment would tell me this isn't just about them, that abuse against the parents, but outcomes for that child or young person. The criminal justice system is a good bet if this intervention isn't put on. So the question is there, so what? So what? And I'm a big believer in it. We find out so what, so that we can learn what works and sometimes what doesn't work.
Thank you. Councillor Jones and then Edward. Oh, sorry,
Thank you, Chair. As this is my last meeting, I would just like to express my heartfelt thanks and congratulations to Nikki and her team. I think ever since we met many years ago at a restorative justice conference that you organised, I've been extremely impressed by your performance throughout, and I think we can have great confidence, as clearly the Commissioner does, in the work that you're doing. And I just kind of wish that the country could reap more reward from the work that you are doing, which is clearly leading, a leading light in the area. One of the just coming to the report at 8.1 under the emerging risks, you highlight the fact that you have this potential cliff edge funding shortfall of 1.1 million. And this is, in a sense, is a result of your success, that in building success through winning competitive grants, which are time limited, you then end up with this cliff edge, which is deeply concerning, because not only because of the loss of the service, but actually the loss of the expert knowledge and the good work that is being done through those programs. And it would be more than just the loss of the funding that would be felt. And I don't really see what the solution is, and you don't propose a solution really in the report, because in a sense there isn't one. But I do wonder whether, Commissioner, you're working with the APCC to lobby for more consistent funding for this kind of work, and making the point that continuity of these programs is really, really important for the value of them to be fully realised. If they only run for a few years, then actually the real value is not being realised. Thank you.
If I may, Chair, yes, and you've heard me talk on this subject before, the cliff edge funding, and I'm afraid it's a result of our fiscal system year on year. You can rest assured, my team, other PCCs and others throughout the system lobby continually. Most of these grants are actually with the MOJ as opposed to Home Office, but the APCC does have close links with the MOJ. Perhaps worthy of note as well, my risk appetite when it comes, because quite often it's a case that the funding cannot be announced until later in the year, and therefore we have to take some decisions, and there is some risk attached to that. Given my experience in policing, with working with the APCC, and my absolute dedication to support victims, I although would never be frivolous with public money, I am willing to take some risk to ensure that we keep the very best people providing the very best services, and I will continue to do so.
Thank you, Commissioner. Did you also have a question, sir?
Yes, very briefly, if I may, please, Chair. Thank you. I think the other thing is, it's going on from Councillor Barkham's question in a way, is I'm thinking about it, I'm not quite sure how to frame the question, in that there's a lot of good stuff going on and we're finding out about it. Is there any channel that we can use so that by what vehicle, if somebody said, I wonder if we can go to the Office of the Police and Crime Commissioner and look for funding, then, you know, because there are sort of things that come up in our neighbourhoods, in our wards, that we could direct. Is there, because the criteria is always changing, is there anything coming up that we could give people the heads up for, that they may come to you and possibly get funding for any more localised initiatives?
Well, I do have a youth fund and a community fund, and I'm very keen for councillors to explore local opportunities. The youth fund is £3,500 to date, over 100 projects I think we've supported. It's not a lot of money, but you know, it certainly can help in some of those real local issues, and we've got lots of examples, and as councillors, you know, supported by the local authority or police, and it's not bureaucratic, it's a paragraph or two. As long as you can show that this is doing good in our communities, then I will certainly look at that. In relation to the broader context of commissioning, we'll certainly have a look at that, and we can get something to all of you, and indeed other councillors as well. And I do have a newsletter, so please do sign up, and we will try and get some more information in there as well.
Thank you very much. Any further questions? No? Well, I'd just like to really echo then what Edward said in terms of particularly thanking Nikki, but the office, you know, in terms of the funding that you draw in, those very robust and evidence-based partnerships that you formed that are making a real difference to our local community. So thank you very much for that. Okay, we are moving on then to item number 7. Which is around the constabulary approach to obstetricia. Commissioner, would you like to present your report, please?
Thank you, Chair. So this was as a result of one of the panel members asking a question in relation to the national Operation Soteria. So hopefully you've read the report, and I shall be brief. But Operation Soteria, well, actually it was around before this, but it's really a product of the national end-to-end rape review. I think it's worth putting some context as to why we had this in the first place, and this became before violence against women and girls became a national strategic policing requirement, which is unusual because normally you would find things like counter-terrorism, you would find things like cybercrime, child sexual exploitation, but quite rightly, VORG, violence against women and girls, is now a national strategic policing priority. And when we look at what that actually means, violence against women and girls, well, mostly this will be sexual offences or indeed domestic abuse, with some other areas as well. From my perspective, I think that the constabulary has a number of approaches, both dealing at different levels and across the different crime types as well. But I just want to highlight a few things that I think are relevant, and particularly to my role as well. One of them, with Operation Soteria, one of the bases is ensuring that the victims are at the heart of the investigation. Well, that also is the same as my police and crime plan. What I do know here in Cambridgeshire, there is a dedicated rape investigation team. They are dedicated, trained specialist detectives, and that's counterparted by the Crown Prosecution Service as well, also have specialist serious sexual offences prosecutors. Seeking and acting upon feedback from the victims, and that has been done and is ongoing and always will be, and that's through the Rape Engagement Project. A focus on the behaviour of the suspect. This is really important as far as I'm concerned, because this can never be about trying to educate victims. This is trying to stop perpetrators from committing some of these terrible crimes in the first place. There has been a lot of good work. I think I've mentioned here before, with the Safer Streets training, we have managed to train nighttime economy. I think we're about to do taxi drivers, bus drivers, in spotting signs of predatory behaviour. You know, the police alone can't arrest their way out of this. But what we do have, and coming back to outcomes, I recall that a police officer informed me that as a result of this training, as a result of some of the work happening in Peterborough, they are absolutely convinced that they stopped a rape from happening one evening. Now, I'm sure that's replicated time and time again, but you know, this is about predators. This is about, and something I certainly did as a police officer as well. Early intervention and prevention through safer streets, so I've mentioned that already. And the constabulary working with the CPS. On that, you may have seen from national media, convictions for serious sexual offences, particularly rape, are incredibly low. I will say this, having been a police officer, they are particularly challenging investigations for a number of reasons, because quite often it will come down in a courtroom to a question of consent. But they are very low, probably too low, and we need to ensure that both the police and the whole system are better geared up to increasing those. And what I can say, I had a recent holding to account session with our Chief Constable. I can't recall the actual figures, but Cambridgeshire is doing much better in relation to conviction rates and the disposal rate, which is an awful word, but this is where they're clearing up that crime than many others. Still very low, and that is seen nationally as well. So this is also about taking a trauma-informed approach to communication with victims. So obviously we commission with the local authority our independent sexual violence advisors. We're seeing some going back to outcomes, we're seeing some really good progress there as well. And this is about keeping people engaged within the criminal justice system. You will be aware, frankly, diabolical backlogs in our Crown Courts. Clearly, victims of crime having to wait this amount of time to have their day in court is challenging at best. But those ISVAs, the Independent Sexual Violence Advisors, are supporting and making a real difference. Proactive and effective multi-agency management of suspects. So this is MAPA. You may have heard of this. I myself was involved in some of these multi-agency management meetings many years ago. It comes back to my point, the police can never arrest their way out of it. It needs partners around the table to ensure that we're putting the most impactive measures on those most dangerous people in our communities to keep the rest of us safe. An improved use of civil orders. There are a multitude of civil orders that now can be used. In fact, although I digress, I was fortunate to be invited to the launch of the Neighbourhood Watch ATM theft event recently. And I mention this because when we have a ram raid, etc., you know, quite often I get an email or a text saying what are the police doing about it, and we've not got enough police, etc. Actually, what's happened there, we've got Nationwide Link, who run the machines coming together, we've got the local authority, we've got local businesses coming together to see about the prevention. And, you know, this is one of the things I also learned, one of the best ways to deal with those who commit these sort of crimes, these happen to be ram raiders, is use of new civil orders. So quite often, because of the nature of their criminality, in fact, I was told one of them put down their occupation as ram raider when they went to prison. So they will come out and be a ram raider. And there's not much intervention or prevention we can do with that individual, but what you can do is apply for court orders which stops them from having any cash on them, stops them from going out at night, stops them associating with various people, and if they breach those, they can be arrested. So for me, this isn't just about the police investigating, making an arrest and going to court. It's using all of the other tools in the toolbox. Lastly but not least, digital forensics. I think I've made panel members aware before, I am a national PCC lead for forensics, a very interesting and important area of police and in fact the wider criminal justice system. Why is this relevant to Opsoteria and violence against women and girls and the end-to-end rape review? Is it was a case that quite often evidence of these crimes, evidence whether it happened or not indeed, would be found on digital devices, mobile phones. So what was happening, the police were taking mobile phones away from victims primarily, and suspects, but victims to do the download, to do the analysis, and it was taking forever. And any of us will know, because probably we're in the same position, but particularly if you're younger, like my younger children, you take away their mobile phone for any number of days, you've taken away a good part of their life. And it's not acceptable because these are victims. What I can say through some of the work that I've done with colleagues nationally, we're now much, much better. We can get phones back within hours. In fact, we've got a mobile digital forensic van, which government paid for. I might have, because of my particular interest nationally, we probably did pretty well in Cambridgeshire by getting one of these things. But this means that we can actually go to people's houses, download their digital devices, and they're not without their phones. So some of that soft stuff, which actually is just improving the picture. I'll stop there. There is an awful lot of work going on. Clearly, practically all of it is operational, but I just thought it would be useful to give you that update.
Thank you very much, Commissioner. Are there any questions? Thank you. Councillor Barkham.
Thank you, Chair. Excuse me. Thanks for the report. Good report. Just for clarification, does this particular operation include male and female victims? Because you only referred to women and girls in your introduction.
The response to a allegation of razu, rape and serious sexual offences, whether you be a man or a woman, the same is not the right word, but you will get the absolute best response. So the answer I always get from the constabulary, because it's a question that I ask, whether you're a victim of domestic abuse, whether you're male, female, and the same with sexual offences, you will get the same response. So it doesn't impact by gender, if that's the question.
Okay. Fine, so it includes both male and female victims. Just note on section 4.3, it says live investigation, 6 on the 300. Would it be possible to split that then between male and female numbers, so we know comparatives, how many female victims and male victims? Thank you.
I'm happy to take that away. Let me be really clear. We are aware that both male and females can be victims of domestic abuse, and I think the last figures I saw, around 25% of reports to policing were male when it came to domestic abuse, and I don't have the figures for sexual. Certainly from a child abuse, and I do have some knowledge, though not the latest stats, you know, that's a crime that impacts boys and girls, as we well know. But I do want to be clear on that national strategic policing priority of violence against women and girls, and I make no apologies for this. The simple fact is that women are far more likely to be subject to domestic abuse and sexual violence, and with catastrophic results when we see up to 3 women dying every week as a matter of domestic abuse. That doesn't mean it doesn't happen to men, and men should get the absolute best service, but that's why the focus and the policing priority set by government is around violence against women and girls.
Thank you, Commissioner. Are there any further questions? Thank you, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. The comment about seeking and acting upon feedback from victims, is there anything else that you can tell us about that feedback that would help us, and is there any influencing, for example, that we should be doing on your behalf? You talked through, as an example, about how long it's taking for the courts to deal with problems, which I think is a really big issue. The other thing you mentioned was about challenging victim blaming language. And I have a concern that when things get to court, that is exactly what a defendant tries to do. And you say ultimately comes down to proving consent or not consent. So is there anything here that we can take away as a panel to help you on this?
I'll hand over to Nikki in a moment in relation to the direct question around that feedback. I think I mentioned court backlogs. I mentioned some of the complications. I think always my big ask, and particularly with the communities you serve and the platforms that you have, is report. And these are often very challenging types of crime for victims to report. But you know, there is an absolute need, and the response you will get nowadays is completely different to days gone by. The system, not just policing, you know, recognise these types of crime, and you know, no one ever gets it right all the time, but the response now is far better than it's ever been. Nikki, could you
Thank you. So what we're referring to in that paper is a pretty innovative piece of rape engagement project that we did that lasted 14 months. We did it with a national company called Lime Culture, who are sexual violence and rape specialists. It was a partnership between the constabulary and our office, looking at trying to gain feedback from people who just reported an experience of rape to police and their experience through the criminal justice system. So what we were doing was looking for feedback on their policing experience. So this was live time. They were reporting to police and they could be referred into the project within weeks to talk about the experience of reporting. And what we were doing was getting that feedback straight back into policing. And they were actually changing processes as it happened based on this feedback. It was called this Lifetime project. And then what we were doing was re-engaging with them at certain, there was something like 6 key points in their journey. One was reporting to police, one is when they might have had the next update from policing, one might be where there might be a decision to charge, and we're trying to see the impact at each stage of the journey. But also we were looking, secondly, at their experiences of accessing our support services. So in Cambridgeshire, we commission a county-wide support service to support victims of rape and sexual violence, which is held in a contract with Cambridge Rape Crisis and Peterborough Rape Crisis working together. And what we wanted to do was almost quality check how that service was being delivered, and also think if there was any feedback coming from rape survivors that might want to feed into improving the commissioning of that in the future. So it was twofold. It's actually been an amazing project. You have to have an end to everything. They don't just roll. So after 14 months, we have gained we've got the feedback we needed. So there's been changes to police processes. We've got new information about how to commission, and it's been replicated across several areas in the country now. And it was very much about safe practice, because seeking feedback from victims of crime has to be done in a really, really safe and carefully managed way.
Thank you. Okay, Edward and then Councillor Barkey.
Thank you, Chair. I'm extremely happy to see there is meaningful progress on this area, because it's, I think we've known for a long time it's been a very neglected area and requires a lot more resource than has been made available until relatively recently. I just wanted to draw your attention to an academic study that's been carried out in Australia, UK and US, if you haven't already seen it. Only the Australian report has been published so far. But it's actually a study of the propensity to commit sexual violence against children. In fact, the study's title is Identifying and Understanding Child Sexual Offending Behaviours and Attitudes Amongst Australian Men. I expect that there will be a report that is looking exclusively at the UK at some later date. But the statistics from this study are pretty shocking, that around 1 in 6 Australian men report sexual feelings towards children, and approximately 1/3 of this group report sexually offending against children. Around 1 in 10 Australian men has sexually offended against children. Approximately half of this group report sexual feelings towards children. In total, almost 1 in 5 Australian men in the study have sexual feelings for children and or sexually offended against children. I won't go on and on. But the point that this report is bringing to light is that actually the prevalence or the propensity to commit sexual violence is actually much higher than has been generally recognised. And this goes in with the, it ties in with the victim blaming, where women and girls are made to feel that it's only extreme bad luck or probably their behaviour choices that has led to them being the victim of sexual offence. Sexual violence, but the reality is that actually there is a very large number of men out there who are predisposed to commit these offences, and therefore we have to change public attitudes towards this. And we know that schools have already made that adaptation in extremely rigorous vetting of any adult who has any contact with children. But I don't think society as a whole has made that adaptation. And I think it's really important that this does permeate all of our thinking and policy making. Thank you.
Chair, if I may, I haven't seen that report and wouldn't seek to comment on the findings, other than unfortunately I'm not shocked, because I worked in a child abuse investigation team when we first started seeing the impact and effects of the internet. and certain software was being used, which showed how many hits for awful, distasteful, abhorrent child abuse images here in Peterborough. Far more than we could ever imagine, far more. And of course some people will say, but that's not actually a problem, is it? People downloading and looking at those abusive. Well, not only are they committing that offence, that physical offence by doing it, but I'm afraid no one will ever persuade me that you don't pose a risk to children if that's something that you are doing and seek sexual gratification from. I did mention strategic policing requirement. Child sexual exploitation, child sexual violence, child abuse is a strategic policing environment. There has been significant investment. The National Crime Agency was actually the lead agency for a lot of this. But there is an awful lot of work going on from our regional serious organised crime units plus the constabulary when it comes to child sexual exploitation. The difficult bit, and the bit for us to all to understand and not shy away from, though, is that most of the time these crimes, these offences will be committed in your own home or in environments which you are close to. So, these could be activities or things as well, and we've seen that historically. And as a society, we must not shy away, we must deal with that head on, because when you talk about those figures, be interested in the next one. Is it someone that you know? And I suspect that would be a fairly high percentage as well.
Thank you, Commissioner. Councillor Varkey.
Chair, before I ask the question, I wish to declare an interest. I am a practicing criminal defence lawyer. So my question is, I heard, if I heard you correctly, you are referring that you're investing we have a system where you can keep the downloads, mobile downloads within 24 hours, or are you saying we have a system already in place, or we are going to go to victim's house and download it? Do we have a system? Question number one. Question number two is, you referred that the rape conviction rate is low. I think is challenging. What do you mean actually? Who is challenging? Maybe I think I have heard it correctly. So challenging, you challenge within the system or something else? And thirdly, if I may ask, Chair, I wish to make some sort of a comment or an observation about the question. The public question was answered. Can I or?
Was that in relation to the public question?
No, not the question, the way in which the question was answered. Nothing to do with the content, but the way it was answered. If I may.
It may be that you want to make a comment out of the meeting, because we have moved on from that particular point.
Yeah, that's fine, thank you.
So maybe that you want to address
that's fine. Thank you.
Directly outside of the meeting.
So firstly, in relation to digital forensics, I understand, and you declared your interest there, so how this might be useful for you. The situation as I described, like the mobile digital forensics, the DigiVan that they call it, is largely around RASU offences, rape and serious sexual offences. As you will be aware, acutely aware, that practically all crimes have a digital footprint these days, which is a massive issue to policing and the criminal justice system. I don't need to tell you how much data any one single mobile phone may hold, and of course with encryption, etc., etc. And I'm acutely aware of this with my national lead. So the answer is a really good, fast turnaround service can be given in certain cases, not all cases. So there will still be occasions when the police are holding on to digital forensic items for a long time when it comes to victims. And of course, in suspect cases, they might actually be evidence, so the police will keep them anyway under the Police and Criminal Evidence Act. You mentioned challenging. Well, I think the simple fact that those prosecution rates or conviction rates are so low demonstrates the challenge. Obviously, we would all want more resource. I would want more police. I would want more police in every department, including our neighbourhood teams and our raping investigation teams. But I don't think it's just a matter of resource when we look at the challenges of investigation of some of these types of crime. They are complex, and as I say, quite often, and you will know as well as I, they will need to meet a threshold with the Crown Prosecution Service. We have a good relationship here in this county with the Crown Prosecution Service, the police do, which is probably why there seems to be a better rate than elsewhere. But the bar is set really high when it comes to that evidential criteria. We have seen, and I've been involved in national discussions, that maybe that's an area that should be looked at. I mean, success for the Crown Prosecution Service is a 100% conviction rate. I don't think that's a success. I would say it's less. It should be less than that on account of the fact that there are some cases that a jury should just hear, and it may be that they find the person not guilty, but it would still give victims that right to justice as well. But I will come back, and I will say this because I have investigated these types of crimes myself, and they can be very difficult, particularly if the issue is one of consent. And that's why we use digital forensics and others. But quite often it would be for a jury to decide based on two people in front of them, and that's under our evidential criteria, beyond all reasonable doubt, makes it very difficult for a jury.
So, may I? So, the challenge you referred is the lack of resources. Which is the challenge? Am I right in understanding that?
No, resources will always form part of any challenge that the Chief Constable has to balance on a daily basis, because at the same time of resourcing a sexual offence investigation team, he will have to resource a whole number of other areas which are both harmful and impactful to our communities. In fact, most people, what they want and what they ask me is for the local bobby in their city, town or village, and I'm at pains to explain, but what about our rape investigation team, our child abuse investigation teams, our cybercrime? We need those as well. So I don't think it's not just a resource issue. I think if we increased our numbers in those teams by 2-3 times, I don't think that would have the impact. But can I just say this as well, because we're talking about criminal justice outcomes. Actually, what success would look like is the absence of this crime. And I do think there is more work that, I gave the example of the predator, the commission service around dealing with predators of domestic abuse, young people. For me, that early intervention and the education piece to our young people, our young boys primarily, of school age, about healthy relationships, and lots of good work is being done. But I think there's more scope there as well.
Thank you.
Councillor Ferguson.
Thank you. It's really just a question of clarification. Under 4.3, you talk about a rape detection rate, which was 8% in September. What does that actually mean, and how do you calculate it? Because it's not clear from the paper. So
a detection rate is either where there is a charge, a caution, an out-of-court disposal, pretty operational. I'm just going by memory here as well. So basically, it's when the case is solved from a Home Office counting rules perspective. It might not always mean in court, though generally speaking, with such serious offences, I'd like to think you wouldn't see many out-of-court disposals for a rape, and I would be challenging the criminal justice system if we did.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Jones.
Thank you, Chair. Darryl, you've just in your lead on digital forensics through to new technology, we sit fourth. What is that? That's great. We're in the top 10%. In your capacity, or your role in that capacity, what is it that other forces would need to do that we're currently doing and presumably wish to improve on? So what is it that we're for? So what is it that other forces could apply, and where will you be applying either pressure or encouragement or resource to help them to develop?
So, Councillor, good question. Hopefully we've touched on some of those issues, even things like supporting victims throughout the process. And we have our ISVAs, and we have, and Nikki will correct me if I'm wrong, I think for the size of our county and the population, we probably have more resource in that particular area than most. So, you know, that's just one part. A professionally qualified team to deal with rape investigation, because not everywhere will have that. They will have detectives, and often very good experienced detectives, but the Chief Constable has seen fit that he will have a specialised unit. But I think we've got to talk about other agencies, the Crown Prosecution Service I mentioned there. I think there's a good working relationship in this county. And you know, often these things, there'll be process, there'll be strategy. We've had recently the superintendent who was leading up the public protection in this area, I think was very committed and did an awful lot of really good work in relation to all of those types of offences. But I'd like to also say that I think we have some good people working in those teams, and my experience, in fact I was at the Constabulary Awards recently, and one of our child abuse investigation teams got Team of the Year, and I think that's probably because of their dedication to the work they're doing. I don't think we can ever underestimate the human quality.
I think, thank you. I think part of this obviously is you're not involved in operational matters, which obviously is going to happen with each Chief Con wherever they are. Is there anything that you can do, whether it's lobbying the Home Office or whatever, where you can say, actually, you know what, this isn't now just a matter of boots on the ground, this is getting that technology, and you can see that the technology's there, the Digivan, you know, and so that we stay there or go higher, but I'm just conscious if I move to, and I don't know where Cumbria are, but if I move there, that, you know, this kind of thing, they're going to sort of come up because they will have those resources in addition to experienced officers.
What I can say in relation to Obsteteria and others, the Association of Police and Crime Commissioners, this is certainly one of the work strands, so PCCs across the country feed into this. I will always make the best possible case for Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, and we see that in some of the funding that we've drawn down. Many of those grants, and a lot of the commissioning is directly around these types of crimes, these types of offences, and we will continue to do so because we are passionate in my office, and the Constabulary is passionate about these as well. And I will take every opportunity, like our Digivan. We'll have one of those, thank you. I think there were 6 given out and we got one. And I will be lobbying hard. But I think we also need those national conversations around, you know, capacity within the criminal justice system. I talked about courts, Crown Court backlogs. That really comes down to a lack of judges, barristers, and buildings. You know, and the system needs to do something around that. Unfortunately, as well you know, judges don't grow on trees. It takes a long time and a lot of forward planning, and we need to ensure that the system is more robust in future.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any further questions? So if there's no questions and no objections, then the panel will note the report. Thank you. Okay, we move on to item 8, which is around constabulary budget considerations. Commissioner, would you like to present the report, please?
Thank you, Chair. Panel, this is a contextual paper. It's not a budget paper per se that we're bringing to you, but many of you have been around this for some time, some newer, so we thought it would be useful to give you some context to the budget at the moment. Phil is with us today, but a week in, we thought it would be unfair for him to lead. So Jim is just going to talk us through some of the salient points and give a very brief summary.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Commissioner. So this last year, the November panel meeting, that was the first time we did a budget paper like this. And it was with a view to really opening up the opportunity for greater understanding of how the budget is constructed and the challenges within it in advance of the much more detailed and meatier papers for the end, I think it's end of January meeting when we discussed the precept. So the paper's structured around setting the scene in terms of how we are funded, You've heard the Commissioner talk a number of times about the unfairness of funding, so consequently there's some charts in there just to demonstrate that. You know, one of the key things being the fact that the funding is not updated for population changes. So quite literally, we are getting funded the same with our 900,000 population as we would do if we were on 750,000. So it was pretty much set when our population was 810,000. We happen to have grown the fastest in the country, and the funding hasn't reflected that. If we'd have shrunk, the funding still wouldn't have reflected that, and we would have a much greater funding per head of population, and that's just how they've done it. Obviously, when it comes to the budget, there are some obvious things to do in order to make significant savings and efficiencies. Collaborating services, well, we've kind of already done that. 30% of our budget is spent on collaborated functions. Greater procurement in the sector, so we do that nationally and across the 7 forces. And then we've had good reports from external audit and others as regards our business planning and programme management. So, you know, the obvious wins, if you were just parachuting into an organisation to look at this, have kind of already gone. That's not to say that we can't do some things, and the paper does elaborate some of those, but I suppose one of the key things to understand in the paper is how the budget is how the organisation works. I mean, the budget follows that, to be fair. And so we give an example of, you know, you can't save a chunk of money in a particular service by reducing that service without it impacting. We know the issues in the demand hub with call handling. You know, one of the reasons is it takes a long time to train a call handler up, because when they answer that phone, you know, it might just be a standard missing person, but it might actually be a kidnap for all, you know, when the call comes in. Concern for welfare, it could be a suicide, it could be, you know, suspicious circumstances in the death. You know, there are a whole multitude of things that an incident that at first, you know, could be quite standard could turn out to be. And from that call all the way down the line, there are specialist resources that are potentially needed in terms of dealing with that incident. So as soon as you try and significantly reduce a particular function, it will have an impact somewhere else. Essentially, none of the budgets are siloed. You know, there is an integration to it. We then, at the panel pre-brief 5-6 weeks ago, I was asked to put something in about the capital strategy, so we've also included in that. And obviously, come the new year, you will have the more detailed capital strategy in there. So, as best as I can, I will answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Mr. Lee.
Thank you, Chair. Can I just start with a simple question? Paragraph 6.5 refers to using internal rather than external borrowing to avoid interest payments. The only funding that I can imagine is available for internal borrowing is reserves. And is it prudent to be borrowing from reserves in that way?
Not the easiest simple question, actually, I think. So essentially, this comes down through Treasury management. So, you know, what the constabulary CFO did when he first came in was to look to use the cash flow as well as the reserves as much as we could. Essentially, you can, we are under borrowed in terms of how much we could borrow prudently. So if we keep a 5% general reserve, so consequently, I'll have to clarify on that one because that is a technical one. I don't think we invest our reserves as such. But as I say, I think it tends to be more on the cash flow that they are trying to minimise the borrowing from than it is necessarily the reserves. But I'll get a fuller answer for when the finance professionals are in the room in the end of January for you.
Thank you. Can I follow up?
Another one?
Yep.
Yes.
So the thing I really want to drill into is the capital requirements for the two big building projects, the Southern Hub and the training centre. I noticed that the anticipated cost of the Southern Hub has gone up from 35 million in February 2021 to 45 million now. So that's £10 million. It may not be exact like for like, because it may not have included the fit out on that original cost, but still, that's a very large increase. On top of that, there's the 12.7 million for the operational support unit. I'm not entirely clear whether the 5.1 million so this is paragraph 6.11. There's a reference to 5.1 million in the context of purchasing the land. I wasn't clear whether that 5.1 is in addition to or part of the 12.3 million. If you could clarify that. But the real concern is that this inflation in the capital cost, for which there is no grant funding available now, does obviously therefore translate into a revenue cost. At current PLB borrowing rates, even over 50 years, £10 million costs nearly £600,000 a year. And given that most of this report is really setting out how little of the budget is actually discretionary, truly discretionary, £600,000 is going to be very difficult to find. And therefore, what is your strategy to deal with that, given that you are pretty much now committed to building the Southern Policing Hub? And perhaps this is for reporting in the next meeting. What will be the residual borrowing requirement after Parkside has been disposed of? Thank you.
Okay, so I'll do my best on that. So the figures in here are broadly from the medium-term financial strategy and capital programme for earlier in the year, but some of these have been updated for more recently, and you're right, we will have a comprehensive paper on this explaining the full thing. The reality has been that we are not alone in this within the public sector and probably private sector as well. We're facing the double whammy really, that we have had significant inflation following world events and events in the UK over the past 3 years. That has led to significant inflation in the construction sector. Then at the same time, we have had a significant increase in interest rates too. So I mean, even when I was preparing this paper, I think in the medium-term financial strategy in February, base rate was 3.5. Preparing this, I think 5.25. I think it's come down again slightly. But as I say, the significant increase in interest. So that has the double impact. So if we were going to be borrowing for ballpark figures for the Southern Police Station, we obviously have the potential for a capital receipt from Parkside, although that has yet to be decided what the future of that would be. But for argument's sake, cost of the new build minus a capital receipt gives you your net borrowing at a given interest rate. Well, what we found obviously is significant inflation minus your capital receipt leaves you a bigger borrowing, but also that borrowing is at a much higher interest rate because, going back to when these projects were first on the drawing table, the interest rates were incredibly low compared to now. Part of the paper that you will get in January will demonstrate what the borrowing strategy is around that, because interest rates are falling, inflation is falling, and so with our suitable advice from our Treasury management specialists, they will advise on the borrowing strategy. It would be ridiculous to borrow everything we need at today's interest rates, particularly when the build will take a period of time, so we will borrow in tranches at appropriate times and structure the debt in order to get the best borrowing rates on there. Fundamentally, we have an estate, and again we'll have an estate strategy coming through. Fundamentally, we have an old estate. I think the figure that has been used is something like 7% of the estate constructed since the year 2000. So that not only means that we have significantly old estate that needs updating, we have old estate that is nowhere fit for the current environmental standards that we would expect. In the case of the Southern Police Station, That is there to replace Parkside as a facility, regardless of the costs of updating Parkside and the environmental considerations for Parkside. There is a risk that the next time that His Majesty's Inspector of Probation inspect Parkside, they will essentially give us some kind of closure notice to say these are end of use, you need new cells. And as we know, these sorts of projects take quite a long time to get off the ground. The operational impact of the Chief Constable not having cell facilities over in Cambridge would be significant in terms of the operational impact, but the financial impact would be huge as well. So there is an imperative there, and similarly the other two projects that are referred to, one is for the public order training facilities. That was to replace the facilities we used to have at Alconbury, which was essentially MOD land that they were allowing us to use, but then because that land has, I think, been disposed of, we've had to move out of that and find the training facilities. We went to have a look at the plans for the new facility, and we had an update literally last week in terms of the operational impact of not having those facilities. So again, referring to the strategic policing requirement, the Chief Constable has a requirement to maintain a certain number of trained public order officers, so that events that we've seen in the last few months, national policing can respond wherever that happens. They require significant training on a whole range of different skills. If we don't have the training facility that complies with the ever-increasing accreditation requirements, we essentially have to send them off to a different training centre. Because there are not that many of the training centres around, and the ones that are around are pretty fully booked, we are having to send people a considerable distance, which also means we have to put them up in accommodation. So the both operationally in terms of those officers being out of county for a period of time, as well as the impact on the staff themselves. The trainers that go with them don't want to be travelling all over the country all the time, training their people, but there is a financial cost as well. So these are the discussions that the three commissioners have as regards the public order and the firing range, because the firing range is not in quite the same situation, but is getting to that operational imperative around that operational need. So the Chief Constables, operationally independent, they will tell the commissioners what the operational requirement is. We need a 50-metre range. We need a skills training house to practice searches, firearm searches in a building. And then we start working up the proposal as to how we do that. There is some flexibility in that, depending on the nature of the specialised facility, depends on what income generation opportunities there will be. So depending on the surrounding forces, whether they have equal facilities or not, if they have no facilities, come and use ours for a fee, in which case you'd probably build it slightly bigger for that capacity. If they've already got it and there's no prospect, then we wouldn't do. But ultimately, there is still a minimum requirement. You can only do so much, so if you're training firearms officers, they need a range, no getting away from that. That range needs to comply with a whole number of health and safety issues for people. Some of the trainers will be in there a lot, so it has to comply in terms of air pollution as well as noise pollution. So there is, unfortunately, specialist facilities are expensive. So come January, when we've got the capital programme, all these figures will be more up to date, and we will have a very much a structured plan in terms of what the impact of that will be.
Thank you.
So, thank you very much for a very full response. I suppose one of my concerns is that anything that is deemed to be not operationally essential, such as sustainability elements of a development, could be trimmed in order to save money, and that would obviously be you won't be able to retrofit later, and therefore that would be a false economy, both financially and for the environment. But again, as with so many these issues, if you don't have the money, then what do you do about it? And I suppose only lobby government for to intervene and actually to make the case to government that we shouldn't have to be forced to make this choice. We need the funding either as capital grant or as zero or low interest funding.
Thank you. Councillor Barkham.
Thank you, Chair. Very comprehensive answer, Jim. Thank you for that. You actually touched on what I wanted to ask. It was section 5.2, paragraph beginning income generation opportunities. Can you expand on that a little bit about what constabularies can promote with regards to generating income, and are there restrictions on what they can't do, for example, as an organisation too, please?
I mean, I'll take some of that, Jim might want to add. There isn't an awful lot of scope for income generation in policing, as you can possibly imagine. But there are some opportunities. So, for example, the Deputy Chief Constable has developed nationally a training programme which Cambridgeshire is leading on, and therefore that is, to want of a better word, being sold around the world with some input from officers and staff when that's allowed as well. So that's just one example. There are little pockets, but income generation. We always talk about income generation, how we can improve it, how we can increase it. The reality is there's very little scope. I mean, we were just talking about building a new public order centre. My question to the constabulary always is, if there is any capacity, how do we look at then recovering income from other forces using it, etc. So potentially down, and this comes back to the force economy actually, ensure that we're future-proofing so that people do want to come and use our facilities, and that there's space enough there as well. Jim, anything to add?
No, I mean, there's obviously you've heard from Nikki earlier on in terms of how we try and bring money in via income generation via grants and things like that. The constabulary have registered various intellectual property as well. So as I say, it's looking at every opportunity. But as the Commissioner says, this is not ever going to be in a position where you can raise, millions upon millions of pounds.
Thank you. Any further questions, Councillor Wilson?
Can I just clarify something which Edward raised about Parkside? Presumably in the papers that we get in January will include something about the disposal or potential disposal of Parkside, so that we'll be able to see how the costs of the new station are netted off by Parkside. And then is there any scope for funding from SIL or Section 106 or any other sources that would help to provide this? And apologies if you've already covered this previously.
So we'll certainly be transparent with what we're doing with Parkside moving forward, but for your benefit, and particularly for Cambridge, both I and the Chief Constable have given a firm commitment that there will be a city centre station staffed by the local policing team. The plans, what we're going to do with Parkside at the moment are still, we are still talking that through as to what the best value for money option is moving forward. Sorry, the second part?
Well, the second one was about funding of the new southern hub, and whether there's any scope, because you meant for funding it from community infrastructure levy or contributions from other developers specifically towards this, bearing in mind things you were saying earlier about Cambridgeshire being a growing area, that there must be growing needs for policing which should be met by developers and others who are causing this.
So, Chair, that's a very good point. The Section 106 is an interesting anomaly, actually, because policing, along with the other emergency services, are not a statutory party to it. The local authority is. So, in other words, by default, police and emergency services don't get anything unless it's via the local authority. And I do know that the constabulary is linked in with the local authorities on those Section 106 applications. The interesting bit, though, is what we would do with the money. When it comes to the 106, there is some national work ongoing at the moment. First of all, to make policing and emergency services a statutory partner in the thinking of funds when it comes to the Section 106 money. But also, ultimately, traditionally, you'd get a new build, somewhere like Hampton or Camborne, and you get a police station built in it. But that isn't necessarily, the best ways to keep our communities safe. And quite often, it's obviously we know revenue is probably more important than those capital costs and some of those other things like infrastructure, etc., etc. So lots of thought being given out. So the answer to your question is absolutely being considered, and where we can take some of that money, we will do. But it is something I will raise again with the constabulary.
Okay, thank you. I'm just thinking, Chair, from other councillors who know rather more about district councils and city, Cambridge City and Peterborough City funding, that there is community infrastructure levy money that goes from developers to the local authorities at that level, and I personally don't understand why the emergency services shouldn't be entitled to some of that money, but may or may not be out of my remit. Well, it is out of my remit.
Edward.
So I actually work in planning, so I can actually provide a little bit of light on that. The reason why local authorities don't ask for money specifically for policing or fire is because it doesn't pass what's called the SIL tests, the Community Infrastructure Levy tests, which are actually some elements of the legislation that governs asking for money from developers, in effect. That it has to be necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms, directly related to the development and fairly and reasonably related in scale and kind to the development. And it's very hard to make that case for policing, which obviously is geographically dispersed and not specific to a specific development. So it actually it has to come through the precept from the community, from the council tax and government grant. That's how everything to do with policing and all emergency services is funded.
Thank you. Councillor Varghese.
Thank you, Chair. Again, I declare interest as someone who goes to Parkside, Police Parkside. So you just responded to Councillor Wilson that Parkside will be closed. Is that correct?
Right. No, that's not quite accurate. What I'm saying is we're still developing plans as to what we're going to do.
In that plan, is there like you have a plan that you will be shutting down Parkside?
Clearly, it won't be functioning as it currently is. It can't, because we just talked about the cell capacity. So your particular interest, I suspect in a professional capacity, you spend a bit of time in the cells. But they won't be there anymore. They will be going to the new Milton site.
Okay, if that begs a question here. If you are moving Parkside custody to Milton, in the event you're releasing a suspect in the middle of the night, do you understand what would be the availability of the transportation, and plus Milton being a place where the availability of access of public transport is limited? Have you ever put that into consideration? And plus, when you say we are closing Parkside, or maybe not as it is functioning as it is functioning now, I am someone who was just outside Parkside when you have originally announced that it is going to be closing. I was picketing. So the question is this: where will we have a police presence in the city if you're going to close it completely? Or even if not completely, if you're going to keep the custody closed, and how will it be difficult for people, vulnerable people, who have been released from the custody?
So I think, there's a number of questions there, which I have no doubt have all been considered, because they're actually operational, very operational. But they're not lost on me. I worked at Parkside as well. I understand that. The reality is, this bus has gone. We absolutely needed new facilities. The decision has been taken, all decision notices are there for public scrutiny, and it's around value for money and for the operational requirements. So the Southern Police Station is being built. we still do not have, and I'm not being evasive, formal plans for what we are doing in Parkside. The only commitment I will make, and I can only make this because the Chief Constable has made this commitment, is that there will still be a police presence in Cambridge city centre.
About the question I subsequently asked, if a detainee is being released middle of the night, what about his safety?
Well, the police absolutely have a duty of care. I mean, the reality is at the moment, I don't quite follow what the difference is between the centre of Cambridge and, I mean, you can still get taxis. It's actually probably more accessible in some ways, the new Milton site. And this is very operational, but I will answer the question as the best I can. The reality is now as well, I'm in for, probably different from my days, that an awful lot of detainees, firstly, there are less detainees because the people are arrested less often than they were many, many years ago, because there are other mechanisms, as you'll be aware, around interviews, etc. But there is a duty of care for the police. The idea that on a freezing cold night they'll be kicking someone out into the streets of Milton, they would have to take that risk assessment, and quite often people are actually taken home from the cells these days via police transport. But they're very operational. They're absolutely been thought about in relation to this new facility. And frankly, it's kind of the national model. We've already got this in other places in the country. Indeed, our own pick near King's Lynn as well. So they're not always going to be in the middle of our cities or towns moving forward.
Thank you. Thank you. Any further questions from anybody else? No? Okay, if there are no questions and no objections, then I ask the panel to note the report. Thank you. We'll move on to item number 9, which is an update progress report on the delivery of the Police and Crime Commissioner's Police and Crime Plan.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair, and colleagues would have had the paper, so I'll just briefly pull out some of the highlights. So this follows the pillars of the Police and Crime Plan, which the panel will be very aware of. So some of the deliverables within this reporting period, under putting communities first, we had a review of the community remedy framework. To be brief and to summarise, I talked about out-of-court disposals, i.e. not just the process of sending someone to court or giving formal police cautions, but community resolutions. So this is what in effect can be a community resolution and what can't be a resolution, and that has been published. I mentioned the fantastic news about all our CSPs joining up. What I would say, this isn't actually just about posts and money. What we have seen now, they come together on my high harms board, is some really good interoperability between the CSPs. Do it once and do it well, and then share it, borrow it, etc. And we see that, and that's really got us into a good place. Business engagement recently did a webinar in relation to cyber in our business community. I'm often asked by this panel, what more can we do? We've tried a couple of times now to engage with business around cybercrime, and the significance here, we know that businesses, particularly at the moment, they've got it hard. Their primary drive and purpose is to ensure their business is running, but cyber security for small, medium, large is really important, because when it goes wrong, it really goes wrong, and the business goes wrong. We've tried to engage at times to suit them with our Eastern Region Cyber Resilience Centre. We find it difficult, and so next time round, when we try and engage again, we'll come to you and see if you've got any local contacts as well. But we did do one recently, and it was well attended, and got some really good feedback after as well from some businesses. We've responded to the review into the role of Police and Crime Commissioner and to the government's review of antisocial behaviour. Vision Zero partnership, this is our road safety partnership. We continue to work with that. I think what we're now doing is trying to build closer ties with the combined authority, given one of their devolved areas is transport. Actually, sometimes, and I'm pleased to see in the plan this time, road safety forms part of it. I'm hoping to some extent that's because we're joined up on that board, and I attend there, because so often we'll see transport strategies and the road safety bit is a bit of an afterthought. Well, if we look at the fatal and serious injury collisions we have in this county, I think it should be right up front rather an appendix at the back. So work continues there. Crime prevention, the drug strategy, harm to hope implementation, for which I am the SRO. Had a meeting recently with some of the tacticians. We're doing really well in this county. We've got some good people in both the Peterborough and Cambridgeshire drug partnerships are doing really well. The data is showing us as top in the eastern region in many areas. Victims and witnesses, serious violence strategy. We now have new legislation around this, and I lead on this from the higher harms. Well, I am allowed to say, so serious violence, knife crime, really significant issue across the country. Not so much here in Cambridgeshire, but we do have it, and we have some awful, particularly, probably more so in Peterborough, Cambridge, Wisbech, we've had some issues around gangs and violence. What we have seen recently, the latest data, and we don't take police data, we take it from A&E, because quite a lot of the time these will not be reported to police, particularly gangs. They're not going to go to police, but they will go to hospital. I'm not allowed to give the figures because it's health data, but what I can see is that we've had a really, really big reduction on people going to hospital as a result of knife crime. So the implication there is that there's some good being done by all the agencies involved. Ethical policing, we're currently quality assurance of the independent custody visitor scheme. We've submitted all of our accreditation to be gold standard. That's soon to be announced, watch this space. I'm not saying that we are gold standard at the moment, but that will be announced that we might or might not be a gold standard very shortly. And we've got the annual sustainability report. Robust enforcement, we've talked about the criminal justice system and some of the work that's going on there. I chair the local criminal justice board. We've talked about bug logging courts. That's first and foremost in those meetings that I have with senior strategic leads. And there is a lot of work. Once again, Nick has been involved in much of this as well. But a lot of work in trying to ensure that we can do the best with what we've got here in Cambridgeshire. And with the national crime and policing measures, I recently had a hold into account meeting with the Chief Constable. Neighbourhood crime is significantly down. So this is neighbourhood crime as defined by government, burglary, robbery, theft vehicle across the county. It's significantly down. So there's some good news there, but that does not mean I do not understand that we will have peaks and we will have troughs. And when crime does occur in our communities, it's impactful. It's no good telling people crime is down. They need to be able to see it and feel it. I think I will leave it there, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Councillor Varkey.
Just one question on 5.4. Could you just give me some sort of an idea what percentage is the black and ethnic minority officers in Cambridgeshire?
What percentage of BAME officers in Cambridgeshire? I don't have it to hand. It's not significant, but if you put it, this is from memories. Please don't quote me on the numbers, but obviously you've got to put that against the demographics of the county. I know that it's under 10%, but I don't have the exact figure with me. But I can get that for you, and it is less. Last I heard, hopefully I'm not doing the chief a disservice, but it's less than what we should be. Lots of work has gone on there. Once again, the panel asks, what can we do to help? The police does a lot of work in engaging with our communities. I think they would say they find it most difficult with our black communities to recruit from, but there is lots of work going on there nationally as well. Whilst I'm on that, though, what I can say, of the 500 recruits that the Chief Constables had to recruit as Uplift programme, so they had to recruit 500, 44% have been women, which I think is fantastic. Obviously you wouldn't see 50%, but 44% compared. When I joined the police 40 years ago, there was a training score of 25. I think we had 2 female police officers. And let me tell you, having worked with many female police officers, that's fantastic news that we're getting that talent into the organisation.
Thank you, Chair. Any further questions to Edward?
Thank you, Chair. I've got 2 questions. One is around Vision Zero. I think we possibly we've discussed having a paper specifically on this to the panel at some point in the future. But it's still not clear to me who's actually leading Vision Zero. And the discussion, and then the report says the discussions are underway about future funding and governance, which makes the whole thing sound rather uncertain and as if there's not really a very strong commitment from other partners to make this happen, which is concerning. So do you want to answer that just specifically first? And I'll find it.
So I think there is a commitment from the partners. In fact, they met recently. As I said, I think there's a bit of work in progress here. Certainly, I will be having conversations and have started those conversations with the Combined Authority, because quite often this will come down to resource as well. I think the commitment to reduce the KSIs in relation to fatal and serious injury collisions is there. And in fact, I've seen the most recent data, and it is going down. But every death on our roads is one too many. But the data is that it's going down. It's still there. Those conversations are ongoing because there also needs to be resourced. And I think to now the Police and Crime Commissioner has resourced that out of a community reduction fund. Well, that money doesn't exist. Now, if this is a post that we want as a collective system across Cambridgeshire and Peterborough, we need to come together and do it. So I'm very much acutely aware of the requirement, and I've no doubt we'll make it happen, and that's why we're having some of those conversations with the Combined Authority.
Which authority is actually leading? I mean, is there an individual who's leading it? Because without a leader, these things do generally drift. Someone needs to champion it. So, to date, I mean, I'm the one that's actually funded that post of the sort of director, and currently still am. But I understand it needs to come under the umbrella of an organisation, and to date that's been highways, generally speaking. But I would just challenge a bit, because a leader is a partnership, and there's always a risk that when someone takes that mantle, the others think that, oh, well, someone else is doing it. That's the bit I don't want to be in. And to some extent, tactically and strategically, I want the partners to get on with this and make it work. So those conversations are ongoing, and it's certainly something we can report back to this board, this panel, at a later date. Thank you.
Thank you.
Can I follow up with another question?
You may.
Thank you. So the other area I'm interested in is on the drug strategy implementation, where it says that it's performing well against national expectations. Could you perhaps expand a little on what are the national expectations?
So, I mean, this might, Jim will look at me now saying, what are you doing? This might be another at some stage we come back to you, because I think there's some really great work, and I'm not going to pretend that I have the in-depth knowledge of all the measurements that are currently required by government, and there are many measurements, and my office are very much involved in this. Actually, coming back to the value of the office, a lot of the work going on in implementation of the drug strategy is happening in the OPCC. You wouldn't think that, would you? You might think that might be elsewhere, but it's happening in my office. So some of those measurements are around people taking up treatment, people successfully coming out of treatment, and those are the sort of measurements that we're doing really well on. But I can certainly come back with more detail at another time in relation to those criteria. Much of them will be published, actually. And publicly available.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any further questions? No? Okay, if there are no further questions and no objections, then panel note the report. Thank you very much. Sorry, say that again. Oh, sorry, sir.
I thought you had your hand up, sorry.
Chair, I just knew that we were coming to the end of my bit and I'd be asked to leave, but I just want to say, because I noted earlier that it was Edward's last panel meeting. We've been on this journey since I was elected as PCC. I just want to say on public record that I value your well thought through challenge, but also in your role as chair and on the panel, your support as well. So thank you from me.
Thank you very much. Councillor Varkey.
Can I make my observation about the way the public question was answered? Because I want to make it public record. I don't want this
Councillor, just one point. That particular item was a question for Mr. Fulton. It was responded to. If there are any comments, those can be addressed directly offline because it's not. We've moved on from that particular item now.
I'm not happy with that. I'm disappointed the way the question was answered. Like, if a public is asking a question, they have every right to ask a question, but the way bringing matters which are directly not related to the questions, and that is the way of simply undermining the public confidence even to ask a question. That's all I have to say. Thank you.
Thank you. Duly noted. Okay. Thank you very much. Then, Commissioner, this is indeed the part of the meeting where you and your team may leave. Thank you very much for your input this afternoon.
I'm sorry, Chair, I couldn't resist. I just wanted to say that then, but I was not sure whether I can say that then or not. So
your comments are duly noted, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, we're on our last agenda item then, which is the meeting dates and agenda planning. So I think I'm just looking at them here. Our next meeting is the 31st of January, and obviously there will be clear focus in that one on finance, budget reporting, plans, etc.
Can I just check the location? Is that right, that it's in
I don't know the answer to that. Well,
it is, okay.
yeah, okay, so we think that that meeting is in Huntingdon. It's where we used to meet, yes, at the District Council. There's a provisional meeting on the 14th of February here, should we need that in relation to financial matters. And then the next meeting is Wednesday, the 13th of March. And we need to think about what we would like on that agenda, aside from the kind of standing items. I don't know whether anybody's got any particular thoughts about that at this point in time.
Yeah, when we had the pre-meet, one of the things, just to draw the attention of to the committee, that the Police and Crime Commissioner elections are to be held next May.
Yes.
So it might be a good idea if the Police and Crime Commissioner was, I'm going to say, held to account, but perhaps it would be an opportunity for him to say what he's done. It's not necessarily a pitch for office, but by the same token, to draw his strategy together and any plans that he has for the future if he wasn't successful, so that we could ask questions now rather than potentially after he's left office.
So in theory, what we could ask them to do is sort of bring forward the annual report rather than leave it in July when there is a new commissioner in place who won't, potentially, a new commissioner in place that obviously won't, we've only had a few weeks. So we could do that if, with your agreement, we can ask for that to happen. Yeah? Okay, we'll duly note that then and we'll ask them to do that. Okay, anybody got any other questions, comments? Anything else? Okay, thank you very much for your time, effort and energy this afternoon. That ends the meeting, thank you. We'll see you again in January. So a very Merry Christmas when you get there.